Thank you so much for coming. David and I thought we could just introduce each other and ourselves. I'm Elisa New, formerly Elisa, but everyone calls me Lisa. And I teach American literature at Harvard. And for many, many years, I have taught courses in American poetry. For most of those years, I would teach small, focused courses on 2 or 3 poets, or perhaps early American poetry through Frost. And invariably, I had really great students, but they were the already converted. They were students who thought they liked poetry, who knew they enjoyed it. And I was frustrated by that. And my husband looked at me and said, well, it's obvious. If you want to be teaching people who don't know poetry, you have to give a course that offers the whole history of American poetry in 1 semester. And I did think that was ridiculous. But 5 years ago or so, I started to do that. And what I found is that I was teaching an entirely different audience. And I loved it. I really loved it. I loved, instead of taking someone from 80 to 86, I was taking people from 10 to 70, right? They went from, I once read a poem I liked or I feel guilty, to, I love poetry. And that feels to me like real teaching. And so when I first heard about Harvard University's initiative to begin to teach online courses with the promise of thousands, perhaps thousands of students worldwide, and an offer of video crews and other nice perks, I was the first humanist through the door. And so 18 months ago or so, I began to film a course called Poetry in America that will begin to run the whole history of American poetry, from the Puritans, from the Mayflower, essentially, or even before, through hip-hop and spoken word of the present day, and that will begin running this fall. As I began to create this online course, dragging my video crew off to historic sites so that we could film Walt Whitman in Brooklyn, so that I could read the nearly poetic prose of those who first landed in Truro, Massachusetts. It is a few blocks from my Cape House, which was amazing to me. Where we have our Cape House, that's where William Bradford got off the Mayflower. That's where Mort wrote about, in terms that were almost poetry, about thousands of birds and trees higher than he had ever seen. So as footage began to pile up in the Harvard video storage, it began to occur to me that there might be something more than an online course here, especially since, kind of experimentally, from the beginning, I had started to ask people, distinguished people I knew because of my husband, Larry, people I'd met at Aspen, people I had just happened to meet, but who were really familiar American faces. I began to ask them, would they come on camera and talk about an American poem with me? And some of these people had a poem they loved, and some of these people said, sure, I'll do this for you, Lisa, absolutely. And then when the time came, they said things like, I don't really like poetry, I don't really know if I can do this, and these are very distinguished people, some of them, getting very nervous, writing me multiple emails, call me. And so I began to collect some amazing conversations with familiar faces, with Elena Kagan, with Tony Kushner, with Eve Ensler, with Drew Faust, with Larry. I drafted one summer day to read a poem, not something he's used to doing. With Woody Allen, all sorts of people. And I looked at, and as my online course was kind of developing and rolling along, I looked at this footage and thought, you know, maybe there was another audience for this, that there might be people who wouldn't want to take a whole online course. They weren't going to start and do the history of American poetry, and they weren't going to maybe even feel confident enough to jump in where they were interested in, you know, 1950, which is often where most people get interested. They were just never going to do this, but maybe if they saw it on TV. Now it's time to introduce David. So I took some of these interviews. Some of these conversations with distinguished Americans. That's a more elegant way of saying celebrity. And I took them to WGBH and asked them, did they think there was something there? And they said, yes, we think there's something there. And before I turn this over to David, I just want to say, by then, we had launched test modules. First, a test module on the poetry of early New England that was far more popular than I ever expected. Most of you probably have not read much of the poetry of early New England. It is mostly the poetry of ministers and ministers' wives. It's really kind of great, but I didn't think a lot of people would like it, and there were people all over the world who said, Anne Bradstreet is my new poetry crush. You've never heard of Anne Bradstreet. And then we ran the poetry of Walt Whitman. And what I started to notice as I read the discussion boards is that there were thousands of teachers taking, that the students who were really on the discussion boards, writing extraordinary comments, asking for more work, annoyed that our annotation tool wasn't yet working, but wanting our annotation tool to be working, were teachers. And so I also began to think about and then talk to the Harvard Graduate School of Education about curating some of this pretty massive, this pretty massive project, and beginning to build professional development courses for K through 12 teachers, courses absolutely tied to the Common Core and to the poems that are suggested in the Common Core, but courses that also included materials that could go right in the classroom. And so as my conversations with WGBH were starting to get serious, and people started telling me, oh, David Grubin, if we can get David Grubin, you know, that will be good. I was also starting to think, let's make a lot of this so that it's really suitable for classroom use. Since teachers, I had been told, where do they go when they want really rich material for the classroom? They go to public television. So there's a partnership now between Harvard Graduate School of Education, WGBH, Harvard X, which is our online thing, and boy, is it complicated. But then there's David.
So
that was long. Sorry,
David.
I
want to thank Lisa for asking me to be a part of this. It's very exciting. She's now my collaborator. Collaborator is one of those funny words, isn't it? When you think back to World War II.
Yeah.
But we'll work it out.
Partners in crime. The crime of, yeah.
And, you know, I thought what I would do would be to talk about my experience in making films about poetry and with poets and with poems, which goes back about 25 years. And then I got here, and it's been so stimulating that I got a little discombobulated. And it's partly because that guy in the back, Yoni, I just went to his session, and he's one of these interactive guys, and internet is the future, it's the digital age, everything is changing. It's like, wow. And so I began to think, well, you know, where's the place of poetry? You know, Yoni's telling the audience, well, he reads an email, if it's 3 minutes, you know, too long. He's moving fast when poetry, of course, is asking you to slow down. It's saying, as a great W.S. Merwin said, you know, it's teaching you not to just to look, but to see, not just to hear, but to listen. It takes time. And people in this session, they're worried, like, what's going to happen to me? I'm going to be, my children, they're going to be spending all their time in front of the videos, and you know, everybody's worried about the digital age. So, you know, there was a time when all poetry was oral. There wasn't any written. And was a transition into writing, right? Well, writing and the oral, they stayed around together for a long time. Wasn't like, oh, hello, we're in the written age now. It didn't go that way. So these things are going to exist side by side, and Yanni will be able to read a poem if he wants to, even as he does his interactives and every other thing. So yeah, I'm not worried. You know, I'm not worried about poetry, but there is a question of what's happening to our minds, our human consciousness, because there was a switch from the oral age to the written age, and think about what happened to memory, and a lot of things are at stake here, but it's not happening so quick that we're all going to be lost. So, you know, what does this all have to do with making films about with poets? Well, when I did my first film with poets was in 1988. Okay, that's about 25 years ago. It was at the Dodge Poetry Festival. It was a small festival back then. And that's because there weren't such things as poetry festivals. Or you guys had a slam here the other night. There weren't slams. And as a matter of fact, when I went to school in the 60s, you didn't read the poem aloud in the class. It was all about what you saw on the page. And as our great poet Stanley Kunitz said, the page is a cold bed. He would say it like that. But, you know, it made it, I think, more difficult to get a real feel for poetry. And you know, the books you read, you know, the 7 Types of Ambiguity, I think was a very popular one. It's like the idea is poetry is difficult, it's on the page, it's esoteric, it's in the classroom. Well, all of that has changed today. Poets are still, I mean, let's face it, nobody's making their living as a poet except maybe Billy Collins or Coleman Barks who translates Rumi. They're teaching. But things are changing, and it is because of the fact that poetry has come off the page, and that's, you know, where it used to be. I mean, you know, Homer was not on the page. And for centuries and centuries, and for, you know, all oral cultures, it's not. And what's odd about this thing about making poems for television is that, to me, it's much closer to that oral experience than it is to the written age. And that, to me, is very exciting. So then the question got to be, okay, I had this opportunity to film this festival. What do you do with a poem? Well, in that case, it was sort of easy because my budget was so small. All I could do was to film the poet reading. But, you know, that was kind of cool because people didn't know what Galway Connell looked like, or Sharon Olds, or they'd never seen them or heard them read. And I think that was a kind of inspiring thing. And remember, this whole phenomena of reading, it's really, really new. I mean, Galway likes to tell a story of going in the 60s to do a reading, and he got there's one person there, one person in the audience. And he thanked the person very much, and then the person said, well, yeah, I'm the one who's introducing you. So the audience for poems are, you know, but it's growing and growing and growing, and all different kind of forms. So, you know, Lisa says, let's bring Nas into this. She's not saying, well, you know, he's not in the academy. She's recognizing that, embracing all the spoken art traditions. There's a big tent here. And so we had this opportunity to make this film.
We met and we liked each other. And we thought, where are you going to find a documentary filmmaker who knows poetry the way David does? Never. I mean, he's completely unique. And our relationship, I'm interrupting you, but it's
collaboration.
It's collaboration. We are we differ on some things. And from the beginning, we've been brutally honest. And now it's actually much of the pain is gone, right?
Yeah,
so
I think we're getting on the same.
We've been brutally honest, and now we're really getting to a place where we just see things the same way. And I don't really collaborate very much. I'm a professor.
I do collaborate because that's my business, but I.
But you must really boss other people around a lot.
Well, they're used to making the final decisions. But let me just say, so we have this, this issue of how do you make a film about a poem? So in the beginning, I just filmed a poet. But there are different ways of experiencing a poem. So what about if you try to, the poet's writing about an apple, you show an apple. What's so funny about that? Because it's not that apple, it's an apple that you imagine. So, but people try that, and I'm not against it. I'm just saying it always felt a little funny when you're so specific. There's animations. I've tried animations, and there's some wonderful things that have been done with animation. So I don't know what we'll do with our work, but I feel Lisa's open to what's fun about this. We'll see what's going to work. So Lisa brought me an interview she had done already that she'd shot with Bill Clinton. And it's a wonderful interview. And she said, okay, well, now what are we going to do? And so we figured out some other things to do. So it isn't a film where Lisa sits and has the conversation with Bill Clinton, which might be what the educational course is. I don't know. But my job is to bring this to a bigger audience. And television is an opportunity to power all kinds of other pieces like the education piece. And I always thought that poetry it just needs to be out there so people aren't so worried about it. You forget in the Renaissance, Donatello's, David, Michelangelo's, David, they were on the streets. I mean, people just walked by them, and I don't have any time to look at the David today. I'm busy, but it was there. And that's what would happen if it's on television. Mm-hmm. Maybe you'd look, maybe you wouldn't feel like you're doing a class. I'd better learn this, I better understand it. Maybe you don't like it, maybe you don't understand, so what?
And people always think, that poem, it's underneath all those words somewhere, right? Like, what's it mean? Where's it? Get out of the way, those words. They're ignoring the words all the time. You go, wait. And I don't, some people like this analogy, others don't. I say, reading a poem is like walking a dog. It's gonna go where you gotta follow it, right? You have to watch where, you just have to let it pull at you. You don't get to just.
So what we did was, I had this material already, and we had to figure out some other things to do with it. So I think this is a good time to show you. So what you're going to see is excerpts from about a 24-minute film,
TV
which isn't actually
segment.
Quite finished yet. But this is the way it's going to begin, okay? And let's see if we can get the sound, and I'm going to push a button and see if the button works.
What happens to a dream deferred?
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 What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode?
That's the beginning. And the idea, of course, is you got to know what the poem is. You got to hear it. And it's also, I think, good to see it. Though you could just hear it. It's nice to see the lines. And so that's kind of your central idea, right? You have it's Bill Clinton. This is a poem that he likes. That's interesting. And Lisa sat down and talked to him about it.
He was so smart. he really, you know, he cared about this poem. And as I said, some people have poems they care about, and other people, you know, don't. But this poem spoke to him as a Southerner, as he began to talk, as a person who had always pursued social justice. We were filming in his office in Harlem, and he brought a remarkably comprehensive and sensitive understanding of the poem, and yet he was open in a really interesting way to dialogue, to thinking about it with me. And it is my very strong conviction that really the best way to read a poem is to read it with another person, not to read it in a group, not just to read it by yourself. Novels you read by yourself, but poems began as an oral art, and so it's talking about it, having it between you, that really matters. So next.
Well, so the next thing that happened was, okay, we had this, you know, and Lisa said, hey, you know, Herbie Hancock, he's giving a series of lectures at Harvard.
Why don't I go stalk him? So I did. So I stalked Herbie Hancock.
And so the idea was, when we met with Herbie, would say, now, he knows this poem. How about if you improvise some music to this poem? How would that? So that was Herbie Hancock, obviously, playing.
That you were just hearing.
And you saw that in the title.
But
so
he improvised this for us.
So this is the way the music would sound if he was, you know, that's his way of talking about the poem. Of course, he also talked with Lisa, and then we can see what that section is like.
I think this is a Bill Clinton section, though.
Oh, is it? Oh. Okay, wait. Before we get to Herbie, we actually have what Lisa was saying. Let's listen to Bill Clinton talk a little bit about
Okay,
the poem.
do we just pause 1 second?
Okay, we can.
And I'll
we
say,
pause?
so there are water bottles. There's an ugly water bottle on the table that I know David felt was very unsightly, and might have been one of the reasons that when he did a first edit, it just went my face, Bill Clinton's face, my face, Bill Clinton's face, because he probably didn't want that water bottle. And I get that, and every time I look at it, it bothers me. On the other hand, without that shot that has the two of us, you can't see us looking at each other and learning from each other. And so I insisted on that shot, and now I suffer for the water bottle.
And I'm going to try to make this work. It's not working, of course, but I think I can get it to work. If not, Yanni can come here and make it work for me. So where is this? Where's the menu? Why aren't I seeing the menu? Here, let me.
No, please.
Give it a double click. Oh, okay. I'm clicking my brains out here. Okay.
It seems to me such a formal word, such an academic word, so Latinate.
No, I think it's a perfect word for him, because what he's saying is it didn't go away. The dream didn't die. You just kept putting it off, or it was put off by circumstances beyond your control. Everyone has dreams, and if there's anything you can do in your own power not to defer them, don't do it. You don't know how long you're going to live. You don't know what chances in life you'll have. But you get one shot, and you should get caught trying to live your dreams.
So Elijah, what does deferred mean?
Deferred is like to put on hold. Like, you're going to keep it away for a little bit of time, but you might come back into it like in a little while of your life.
What happens to a dream deferred?
Like, your dream, like, you can't, like, make it to your dream even though you want to, but things are in the way of it, or just not meant to be.
I'm very sensitive to it. You know, I have made every single high school reunion for 45 years, except one, when we were about to enter a military conflict in Kosovo. And I've noticed that the classmates I had who are happy with their lives have not lived uneventful lives. That is, many of them have had family problems, their businesses failed, all kinds of things happen. but they just kept going. The ones that were most unhappy, that seemed to age the most, were the ones who never looked themselves in the eye and said, what do I want to do with my life?
Do it.
And were willing to risk failure to do it. And so I think there's a personal message.
I was wondering about the imagery of the poem. I mean, it doesn't just describe people who have let their lives go by, precisely. It's more visceral, more physical than that.
You can feel it when you read this.
So you see the water bottle, but Bill, the president, nods at me. That was important to me. And I've learned from David, you'll be happy to know not to say so much. And this one segment will be marred by my but David says I'm doing much better. And that too, there's an adaptation one makes from being a teacher of a seminar to being on TV. And I have a lot to learn.
Yeah, like there's a lot wrong with that wide shot, but I won't go into it. More than a water bottle. Everybody see that? Filmmakers? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Look, what's important, is that Bill Clinton is talking to Lisa. That trumps everything. But one thing we forgot to mention is that there are children here. And so that's another element. Like, how do you add elements beside the conversation? I talked about Herbie Hancock out of turn. We went to a school where Lisa had some connection. I don't remember what it was.
Stalking other people.
But
an old student I had taught, a student whose senior thesis I had advised, who is now the assistant to Jeffrey Canada. And I told him about this project, and I said, you know, we just filmed Bill Clinton. What do you think about filming some kids in your school? And it had to get cleared every which way, up and down. And then they picked 10 kids for us from 5th grade, I think, to 11th grade. And we spent a long morning with the kids, really reading the poem with each one of them. I read the poem with each kid. And we learned pretty quickly that 5th graders don't know the word defer, you know, but 8th graders do. We learned a lot of really interesting things from those kids. We learned that disappointment and not getting your dreams, and this made me happy. Disappointment and not getting your dreams was something they were actually not admitting very much into their consciousness. And so many of them would say, but if you just really work hard, you're going to go to college. And I thought, that's good. That's, you know, so it was an amazing school.
It's a great school, and the other element of that with the kids, and remember, I mean, the idea of a poem is you're going to get out of it what you're going to get out of it. I mean, you can't ask the kids to get more what their vision is. But as Bill Clinton says to Lisa, the poem has a personal message and a social message. You'll hear some of the social message, but it's clear it's more than about your personal dreams. It's also about a whole society, a culture. The kids never got the social message part of it. It was always about their own dreams. It also may say something about the times that we live in. But you know, we could say more about it, but maybe we'll go on to the next piece with Herbie, and you'll hear something about the social dimension of the poem. But again, I just want to emphasize what's fun to me about this is everybody comes at it in their own way, helps people understand there's not a right interpretation or a wrong one from this point of view. There's different
6 different shoots here.
You can take it down. Okay, so here's the Herbie piece, I think. I think if I can make it come up. All right. All right. It's coming.
What happens to a dream deferred? The first sentence, the first question, has a bit of sadness attached to it. It's a dream deferred. I mean, dream is like a goal, what you reach for, you know, what you aspire to. You know,
and you want to go for it.
And you want to go for it. Deferred means it's been deflected some kind of way, which is a disappointment. So there's disappointment involved. And this is Langston Hughes. The title is Harlem.
because Langston Hughes was in Harlem and because he was well aware of the continuing challenges of African Americans and of poor people generally. He knew that there was a social dimension to dreams deferred, that if you deferred dreams for a whole class of people, a definable group, that in the end it could compromise everybody else's dreams too.
Herbie Hancock. We were in his house. He was so generous and lovely. And, you know, I told him, I spoke to him on the phone for about an hour and a half, and we sat and read the poem. We read another poem, in fact, too, and he wanted to read this poem with me. And that's what's been so amazing. Person after person throwing themselves into this intellectual experience, some of which, you know, you never see on the screen, but we develop a relationship. But I said, Herbie, I think we're going to ask you maybe to, you know, play a little bit and just say what this poem means to you. And he wrote a 10-minute composition. You know, he sat down at the piano, and we were all just speechless.
It blew us away. So we
it
have,
was so beautiful.
So we have the kids, we have Bill Clinton. Now, we know that the draw is Bill Clinton, but we honor our poets. People are going to tune in
Professor
because of Bill Clinton. You know, I'm in the TV world, you know, but it doesn't have to be a big brain to know that in the TV world. However, every one of these will also honor a poet. And so the question was, who's the poet, the best poet to talk about this? And Elisa came up with Sonia Sanchez, who was a remarkable woman who happened to have met Langston Hughes when she was about 11, which is something. But she's an incredible person and a figure in Harlem. And you won't see this piece, but we actually filmed her in the library there.
In the Schomburg.
In the Schomburg Library, where Langston Hughes...
His ashes are.
Underneath,
so
in the lobby.
We stand on this beautiful terrazzo mosaic floor where Langston Hughes is, and she reads her poem about Langston Hughes. She's also an amazing, you know, you talk to Sonia Sanchez on the phone, she says, I will tell you, my dear sister. And she said, you call me sister, I'll call you sister. And
she's a great figure in Harlem, so that she knows everybody. I mean, this is true. I mean, she's so generous and really generous that we're out on the streets there and people are coming up to her. These are just people that she's met and
she
talked
lives
to.
in Philadelphia.
She's a lovely, lovely, kind of a saintly kind of a figure, really. Yeah. So anyway, she was the poet that was selected for this particular film. And so we're trying to give you a taste of the elements.
A contemporary poet, usually reflecting on another poet, and sometimes a contemporary poet whose own work we'll focus on.
I think it's going to get to, this is the wrong excerpt.
This whole piece, that when you do it, you hear the jazz and blues, you know. So you have to then take your mouth and make your tongue begin and respond. What happens to a dream deferred? Do that, 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 do. Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a so, and then run, 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 run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrup? Sweet, 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 sweet. Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, low, 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 low. Or does it explode? He gives you.
Well, you just sang this all as bebop,
right? Yeah,
right? With some scat.
Yeah.
I hear, and maybe it just sags like a heavy load, an older country blues.
Right. Yeah. It could very well be that.
So again, that's a real taste.
Force of nature.
But what we wanted to get at, of course, is the musicality. And Herbie Hancock is one element. She's giving you the music also.
Improvisation, the way in which Herbie Hancock wants these, Langston Hughes is always thinking about poetic improvisation. And this poem, Harlem, it comes from a longer a whole book of poems called Montage of a Dream Deferred that's modeled on a jazz performance, where you're supposed to hear different voices, different instruments, elements that feel spontaneous. And so there was Sonia Sanchez giving us some music.
Okay,
Are we
now
back to
let's,
the kids?
Yeah, I think we'll take a little more look at the kids, because really what you get in the whole poem are very close line readings. Like, why does she say a dream deferred is like a raisin? Why does she say a dream deferred is like a piece of rotten meat? So,
and we go, and you know, every line, we're turning it
and
in the
everybody
light.
has different ideas about that. One amazing thing I don't think anybody would know, I certainly, you know, why is a dream deferred like a raisin in the sun? So you could think of probably a lot of good associations, but nobody would say what Sonia said, which was, when I was a kid, raisins were poverty food. That was our dessert.
She said, I hated those bloody raisins.
That's a kind of an amazing association that deepens the poem in a whole other way, opens the social dimension up, because you can talk about, you know, a shriveled up grape, but and that's true also. But it tells you how deep a poem goes if you just take your time with a word and with an image. Okay, anyway, here we go. Let's see what the kids are talking about here.
So what would a dream be like that's crusted and sugared over like a syrupy sweet?
A dream like that would seem like a person whose dream was good, that they just left it to die over.
Yeah, they just left it. Yeah. And how about this next line? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load.
Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Hughes was talking about carrying disappointment with you. And do you just carry it till you die like a heavy load?
When I hear when it sags like a heavy load, I hear that your dream is too much on you and you really want to just give up and you don't really like your dream. It's just too much for you.
I think of it as like a burden. Your dream is like a burden that sags like a heavy load.
What I always think is cool about that is that here's Bill Clinton, he has his thought, it's not any better or any worse
Really?
than a young woman. So, and that's, you know, if you see the whole film, that's really the way it
And
works.
I love the choice of that little girl's vocabulary. I mean, there was a kind of lyrical, she was writing about that poem when she said, it's a burden. It was a very small composition, but it was a beautifully chosen word, and she was learning how to talk about a text right there. And that is, as an educator, it's those little moments where you find the right word yourself for a poem, that your own sense of authority grows, your mastery of language grows, and so actually that little girl saying burden is one of my very favorite parts of the whole film. And here's our ending.
Okay, so this is the end of the
And then
whole
we'll just open it
thing.
up to questions.
It's a fabulous poem.
It is a fabulous
In a few
poem.
lines, it captures the landscape of a person's mind and spirit. It captures the experience of millions of people. And it poses a question about what happens next. What happens to a society if it organizes itself around making sure people's dreams are deferred?
What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run?
Does it stink like rotten meat or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet?
Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode?
That you could get some sense of it. You know, as a film person, you want people to have the whole thing. You know, unless you're Yanni back there and you're breaking it up and you're telling stories. He's going to explain to me how you do that.
Yoni.
No, well, he's going to teach me stuff. But as far as this goes, you know, I'm thrilled because you don't get the whole story. You get little pieces, and you know, when you come to the end, I hope you feel it, even though you haven't seen everything else.
So we have time for some questions or some suggestions if you have them. So it's all still in progress and process? Yeah.
Have you thought about other mediums to disseminate this through, like YouTube and others, to get to much broader audiences who aren't in the classroom and who aren't watching TV?
We will eventually I will have an expert help me. I am a one-woman show. Who's, you know, 1 minute I'm lecturing on Langston Hughes, and the next I'm stalking Herbie Hancock. And you know, there are people whose job it is to figure out that dissemination. Right now we've got a couple of Harvard partners, WGBH, and people saying exactly what you're saying. We want it on YouTube, we want it on iPads in classrooms, we want it, and I think that if it works, if this works, it will find its way out into the world where there's lots of audience.
I mean, we absolutely want that, and that's I hate to again bring Yanni in, but because there's all this stuff, you know, there's many ways to get it out now, more than I can possibly understand at my advanced age. So I'm looking to this new digital generation to say, well, why don't you try it this way? Because we can do YouTube, we can do educational pieces. I'm sure Lisa's going to give something great for the classroom.
But PBS is still, and you know, documentary filmmakers like David, still the gold standard for me, and so trusted by educators. You know, you say WGBH, and they say, oh, and I want educators to trust this material, and David does such beautiful work. So. Yes, and then back to you, sorry.
I wondered, how comprehensive will this be? Because, so Bill Clinton wanted to read that poem, but do you have an idea of which poems you'd like to include in your canon, and then hopefully find someone to read that poem?
I have a lot of people already. So we've done Elizabeth Bishop, Frank O'Hara, Ralph Waldo Emerson, help me, Melville, Whitman,
William Carlos
Williams. It's a pretty big canon.
Then do you go find the person, the celebrity, who will?
I mean, this is a really interesting question. They're just sort of targets of opportunity. Lots of people pass through Harvard. We come to places like Aspen. We filmed 7. We filmed Katie Couric, David Brooks, David Rubenstein, David Coleman. You know, I've just been working. We've just been working the whole time. We brought a film crew. And so when I'm in a place where I think, oh gosh, wouldn't that be interesting? What would, you know, will David Brooks suggest a poem? Will David Brooks want me to suggest a poem? Or maybe David Brooks has just used an Auden poem in a column. And so David Brooks had 6 weeks ago used an Auden poem, and we talked about that Auden, you know, maybe we should do that Auden poem. But then I asked Samantha Power if she would do an Auden poem, and it kind of looked like we could have 2 of them doing the same Auden poem. And I said, David, I think Samantha Power is going to do this Auden. I was like, oh, I want to do that. Let's do that. So it's And sometimes it's just surprising. Katie Couric, I asked yesterday if she would do this, and she said, "Oh, I love poetry." I didn't know that. Oh, sorry, I didn't know that. And I, said, "What would you like to read?" And she said, "I'd like to read Elizabeth Bishop's One Art." What a perfect choice.
But let me say this, Anne, is that it's not like a course you would do in school where we're saying,
this TV
how do
isn't.
we lay out the history of, we better start with New England, or it isn't thematic in that way. The real thematic thing is, how do you read a poem? How do you do a close reading? How do you respect the language? How do you dig into it? That's true everywhere, but the poems are going to come out of some kind of serendipitous interaction, and
but
hopefully...
we are also looking for, and we already have, poems that, touch this part of life, that are about this kind of community or this kind of feeling. So I shot a bunch of underwater footage in the richest marine environment in the world a few weeks ago. And I didn't know that I was going to do this, but I was underwater and I thought, oh, Marianne Moore's The Fish. How could I? And that allows me to think about, the people who love science. So the footage I shot on Marianne Moore's The Fish that includes me reading the fish, I'm now going to do a little mini film for Nautilus magazine, which is a new science and arts magazine. We will try in this series, and we already have so much rich material, so that each week you are somewhere else. You are with a poem, you are reading the poem closely, but you are just somewhere different.
I think we have time for one more question.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. This is, I think, probably my favorite thing I've been to. I am a poet, so I'm an exception to that. So how do you, as artists, what is your takeaway as a creative person? Because I see your takeaway in your expression and in joy in doing this project, but as you're interacting with each other and with other people, or maybe people that you would say that weren't necessarily identified as creatives, working with them and then in that kind of that process that you're in.
It's so much fun. It's a challenge. How can I make people like, for lots of people, poetry is spinach. It's spinach or it's threatening. Can I get them just close enough that they'll spend a few minutes, and so that is really wonderful to me. And that Katie Couric wanted to read Elizabeth Bishop, it just enlarges my world. And that she sat and said the things she said, also saying, I said, this is a villanelle, and with some poems, it doesn't matter what the form is, but this poem it does. And she said, oh, what is that? And I told her, she said, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of yes, that experience you have of claustrophobic structure, that is being created by the form in a way I didn't understand. So that's really, but for me, as a person who has spent my life in the classroom, to be working with David, to be, who's thinking visually, and apple is trite if you hear the word apple, to be working with David is so exciting, to be working with a lot of young videographers and video editors on the educational pieces on the whole history of American poetry, and to be working back and forth across really academic material and TV. And we want this to be intellectually enriching but entertaining from the first minute to the last, and only a real pro who's also really smart. I mean, David never dumbs anything down. I just don't feel that. So that feels like an amazing privilege.
And I just should say that what we're really trying to do is bring the language into the culture in a way that people, it isn't just the digital age and wow, we got all of these images now, but let's remember how, everybody talks. You have to learn to read. But everybody you talk, and then you kind of forget that these words matter. They mean something, and you can take them deep. And you can take them on the surface. So we're saying, okay, these poems are made of words you use every day. These are just words. You use these words every day. Let's think about them. And there's a deep yearning in these words and poems. It's this voice, a voice of an individual who is yearning to say something, and to get people to sort of feel that, because the poem, I mean, somebody once said to me the poem was how an idea feels. So it's combining the intellectual and the emotional.
That's right.
And hopefully people will begin to, more and more as they are, we're a part of this whole movement to begin to value the language.
Listening to their language and to their own voices. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for coming.